Hi, I'm Gabrielle from EcoBusiness. Thanks for making time to join us on this Thursday afternoon. So before I start the panel session, we just want to invite Jessica, who's the Managing Director of EcoBusiness, to give an opening address. So Jess, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this beautiful space that is Catapult and also our office. We are really happy to be hosting this session in partnership with MAS and the Greenprint Hub on this very apt topic of unleashing tech on sustainable financial system. I think all of us would know that sustainability is critical. Right now is a huge issue on the agenda, and ACRA has actually just issued a media release saying that they are going to look into obliging non-listed companies, large non-listed companies, to ESG disclosure as well. And as ESG rises on the agenda, the role of finance and fintech is ever more important. So a lot more capital needs to be channeled towards our ESG efforts, but at the same time, capital markets also need greater shielding against the ever-growing climate risks. So the finance community is also facing a lot of challenges when they grapple with sustainability and ESG issues. These can be extremely complex, hard to track. Whether it's quantifiable, measurable, and how they are interoperable is a huge issue that we're all grappling with. There's also the ever-growing risk of greenwashing and transition washing, which is a huge topic that we've been covering over the years. And these problems somewhat lend itself naturally to be addressed by fintech. Blockchain can help to build trust and integrity. For instance, IoT big data systems can help churn info to generate insights. And I think, these ABCD tools that we talk about in fintech is really kind of like coming up to the fore to help us really solve some of these problems. But investors, businesses, and regulators can't just sit back and wait for technology to solve their problems. We need to be the master architects of how this technology works. So stakeholders really need to understand the future trends in this space, and also how best to leverage opportunities and avoid risks, and also how to work better together to leverage fintech to solve these problems. We're really privileged today to have three very diverse speakers and very distinguished and experts in their field, and our own finance correspondent, Gabrielle C., who's moderating the conversation. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Gabrielle and our speakers, and she'll introduce them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess, for that introduction. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here with three panelists, actually. So if you can't see, we have one of them joining us online as well. So I'm Gabrielle, the finance correspondent from EcoBusiness. In today's panel, we'll be speaking about how new technologies such as AI, big data analytics, and blockchain are driving sustainable financing decisions and more sustainable outcomes. So in this session, we will try to provide a view of current and upcoming applications of these tech tools for further sustainability within the financial system. And for our panelists for today, we have Vibhuti, who's on my far left, who is the Regional Sales Director at Avaloq, which is a Zurich-headquartered provider of wealth management technology and services for financial institutions around the world. Vibhuti has nearly 20 years of experience in business development and sales of banking software infrastructure products. And in his current role, he oversees a suite of products that include an ESG investment platform for banks and wealth managers. And right next to me, I have Amelia, who is the CEO of Olea, which is a blockchain-enabled trade finance platform, and it's a joint venture between StanChart and a logistic company, Linklogist. So Amelia has over 20 years of experience in banking and financial services. Before joining SE Ventures, which is the FinTech investment and ventures arm of StanChart, and leading Olea, she also worked at CCIB and HSBC. And joining us virtually from Paris is Ayaz Mita. He's the Digital Finance and SDGs Global Lead of UN Development Program, where he leads a global program on digital finance innovations to accelerate financing for the SDGs. Prior to UNDP, Ayaz had worked in FinTech in over 40 countries and advised many financial regulators and international organizations. So, as many of you know, FinTech isn't really that new or niche anymore in the finance world. But what's emerging is this new breed of fintechs that are tied to some sort of sustainability objective. And they're disrupting incumbent practices in finance to meet such objectives. And this is also in a time where we are also increasingly anxious over whether we will meet the SDGs by 2030. So with that in mind, I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists, is tech the silver bullet to achieve the SDGs? Who wants to take the first step at it? IS, maybe?
I think there are many ways in which fintech is actually already supporting the SDGs. We've seen that during the pandemic with remote payments and online commerce, for instance, without reminding ourselves of a painful period of our recent history. But we also see pay-as-you-go models in emerging economies unlocking access to capital-intensive utilities like portable solar home systems, for instance. We see fintech-enabled circular economy models and sharing economy models, green e-commerce platforms, and so on and so forth. And so there's many different areas in which we already see fintech actually really supporting the sustainability agenda, not to say the least in the risk pricing and impact assessment area, where we see that today we have $2 trillion of green bonds, and that wouldn't be possible without real-time rapid data flows collected through all sorts of technologies and use of proceeds and the ability to actually measure accurately the impact of the investments performed and implemented from the proceeds raised from the green bonds. And that is supporting the whole green bond space today. And we see more and more social green bonds and other types of sustainability green bonds being issued. And we also see, of course, fintech supporting other innovative models in different areas. Two of the areas that I am particularly interested in is really the SME finance space. And I think we'll probably discuss that a bit later. There's a project that we are running in partnership with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where we're trying to design a fintech-based mechanism to unlock access to financing. We know that SMEs represent 90% of businesses in many countries, up to 70% of employment. Many people millions rely on SMEs for their livelihoods. So there's areas where fintech and blockchain in particular can actually support, but I'll give more details on that. And the other area is in the space of climate finance and nature finance. There's many ways in which fintech can be used to mobilize private capital for financing the conservation and the protection of natural ecosystems. Because we can use fintech, of course, to design innovative financial instruments in the form of bonds, in the forms of securities and eco tokens designed on the blockchain to be able to create investable instruments for financial institutions to invest in the conservation of natural ecosystems. And then we can use digital innovation in a broad sense, digital MRV systems, monitoring, reporting, and verification, using satellite imagery, remote sensing, sound scrapers, soil scanners, all sorts of tools that we have today to be able to collect a lot of information and a lot of data, use cloud computing technologies and AI to make sense of that data and to be able to actually measure and report back on impact, to be able to generate carbon credits or biodiversity credits against the carbon uplift or the biodiversity uplift. And that creates a revenue model for those type of projects. So there's, I wanted to give you sort of a very brief overview, but there are so many different ways, from the simplest ways to the most complex ways in which fintech and technology today can be used. And in my view, 2 or 3 technologies that are really instrumental in all of the projects that we currently implement are related to cloud computing. They are related to, of course, artificial intelligence and to the use of blockchain technologies for transparency, trust, and verification of transactions. So these are sort of a few components, but they can be combined in many different ways, in different contexts and different economies to unlock different types of sustainable financing, depending on the needs and the context and the challenges faced. So I will just pause here and hand it back over to you, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Ayaz, for that very comprehensive overview. Yeah.
Maybe I'll add the point about the tech specifically. Sure. Personally, I think tech is an enablement, but what is actually behind that to make tech useful is how you apply the technologies. We can go into it. In my sense, I absolutely agree with what Eric said, right? A lot of the technologies that I would say advanced technology today is focused on providing transparency. However, if you don't have the underlying standard data, what transparency are you giving to people? You will give a transparency to the underlying messy data, which doesn't really help you to draw any insight. So I think there is a whole lot of enablements, including tech, that has to actually combine in order for you to make the tech powerful. And that's what we truly believe. And the way that I see it is not only the underlying enablements like data, but the participant of the entire ecosystem is actually quite important. Eris touched a point about channeling liquidity. Actually, this is something that is core to our business model. I actually really think that the market has, I'm actually a firm believer of sort of the market power. I think if there is an opportunity, people will respond to it. The question is, how do you allow people, enable the people to make the necessary judgment and the right decisions in terms of how they can channel the liquidity? I think this is also important, which is part that I think we will go into it in the regulatory sort of discussions as well. In a lot of the conversation that, because I was also the co-chair of one of the Council of the World Economic Development Forum, actually, one big part of it is always a regulatory support.
Right. And Vibhuti.
That's a very interesting question. This is tech and silver bullet, because we sit on the tech side. We build the tech for different financial institutions. And when we start giving a thought process, what would make sense for the businesses, the underlying factor is, are we providing the technology will help institutions to work better? At Avloq, our mission is to enable financial institutions to manage their clients' wealth better. And we take this journey together with the different financial institutions. We have to make sure that this is a long-term investment they are doing in technology, and we are helping them in this journey with them. These major investment on technology are transformational. These take long-term decisions, but it also take a lot of investment from the institutions. When this such a Herculean task of investment and effort is taken, there is an expectation that this will be sustainable for the financial institutions and for their clients. The clients, when come to the financial institution, they have a hope that I am putting my money and we want a return. That return has to be on long-term investment that has to meet different goals. Now what we have seen in last few years that these goals have gone beyond the financial goals and it's expanded towards social goals, governance goals. And that's why when clients are asking their institutions on their investment needs, they are asking, where are you investing my money? Where is exactly it's going? How you can help me understand more about it? That goes back to the idea of transparency, which is very important. So tech is enabling this transparency. Tech can help how do you do it, but it's all in our hands, how do we utilize the tech. We can provide all the capabilities. In Avloq, we provide an ESG module, what we call it, where financial institutions can use to advise their clients how they can invest to make their portfolio. What returns they can get by investing in, let's say, a green bond or in any other ESG product. But then it's up to the clients to decide. So power lies with us. Tech can be an enabler, but we as individual has to take that in our hands and decide for ourselves.
Right. Okay. Great. I think that's a good segue into maybe all of you also talking about the specific, solutions that you have to offer from each of your organizations as well. So Vibhuti, actually, maybe you can tell us more about the ESG investment solution that Avloq offers for your clients at the moment.
So ESG solution sits as a part of our enterprise suite of product. What we have been doing in last few years that we have been investing to enhance the requirement which we see evolving from institutions. Traditionally, we have been offering the products and services to the financial institutions where they can use our modules and technological capabilities to meet client requirements. And these requirements had been looking very carefully where they are investing. Are they investing in tobacco stocks, or they are investing in a fund which can use the money into and a mutual fund which can source the money to a gambling company. These were the initial thought process which is started. But what we are seeing is the individual investor wants to decide on themselves. And that's what we are trying to bring the capability as a tech solution, that individual investors can decide on themselves, where do I want to invest my money? And this is a key journey which we are taking along with our clients and partners in enabling them to give power back to the individual and especially retail investors, so that they can decide about themselves how to invest their money and what are the goals they are looking as a return from there. So that's the key initiative we are doing as an further progress to the basic features what we have been seeing in the financial markets.
Great. And for Amelia, maybe you can tell us about what Olea does as well and how it's aiming to disrupt the trade finance model and to make these transactions more sustainable.
So Olea vision is to empower sustainable trade. And I just want to make sure that I clarify what is the underlying belief. We do believe that trade is a fundamental to sustainable economic development, which means that the agenda should be right as not only the economic side, implications of the environment, but also actually the sustainable part. So what part of the business is actually enhancing financial inclusion, and which part of the business are having actually a long-term sustainable impact on the economic development. And because of a conviction in that, the platform is decided to tackle the existing sort of trade finance gap. You can actually find all types of report in the market to tell you the trade finance gap, ranging from 1.5 trillion to actually 5 trillion, depending on where you see it. But squarely, if you do sort of the top-down triangulations, a large part of this gap is in Asia, at least 40–50% of that. And you can imagine that if you can unlock this, the types of economic impact that you can make to a lot of the emerging markets is actually huge. So therefore, our platform is to decide to use technology to actually tackle some of the pain point that we see why trade finance, global liquidity, capital flow is inefficient into the trade finance space, right? Number one, transparency, which we talk about, and it is real. Meaning, if you really don't understand, trade finance is a very complex product, right? If you want to avoid fraud, there's a whole lot of legal, regulatory across market that you actually need to be proficient about. Then you need to avoid the fraud risk, right? And then you need to actually avoid supporting, that's a formal word, like unethical business. So how do you actually step by step unpeeling the sort of complex products in the world? So a typical sort of example, we talk about blockchain in transparency, but I actually want to say that most of the sort of common technology we use are extremely powerful. I mean, think about the mobile app, right? I spoke to one of a startup in Europe. Basically, they use mobile app to measure the social impact of the smaller SME across emerging markets. It's not big tech, right? So I think technology is important, and let's not just throw the big tech terminology. There's actually quite a lot of, like, what you use day to day is actually quite important to measure it. Right now, I think the industry has a strong focus on E. I think there's less focus, or actually limited focus on S. But for me, because Ollie is set up to actually empower sustainable trade, S is also a very core element. And I should say that, yeah, while E have various different standards, but I can at least get some credible sources to make reference to E. It's almost impossible right now. if I don't actually find a creative way to actually make sure that I have the S impact measured, and let alone G at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I like what you said about using the common tech to matching those common tech with, I think, applications which are, much bigger than that, much bigger than E as well. And it seems to be about like connecting the right tech with the right applications and making those applications accessible, right? Yeah, and for IS, maybe you can tell us more about how, I think you did run through some of the new technologies that I think UNDP has been embracing to unlock all these new capital for sustainable investment. I think you mentioned already the work that you're doing with MAS, how you're also thinking about using a lot of blockchain and cloud computing in those different contexts as well for nature financing and SME financing. But yeah, I think maybe you can talk about some of the key projects, I think, to do with also including a lot more smaller enterprises in these countries with perhaps less developed financial infrastructure, since I think that's something that in Asia is particularly pertinent, a problem.
Yeah, so maybe I'll focus on one example. There's many, but I would like to talk about the project that we are currently implementing with MAS, which is really about SME finance. I think Amelia has already mentioned the challenge, the $5 trillion gap in terms of financing for SMEs that are so important to our livelihoods. And traditional financing for SMEs currently is happening based on documentation and based on collateral, mostly and mainly. And yet there are so many SMEs and MSMEs that don't necessarily have the full documentation. They don't necessarily have a demonstrable collateral. And so what we are trying to design for is how can we actually build a digital profile of an SME in the form of a credential using alternative data points that could be sourced, that would be an indication of the willingness to pay or intent to pay, and the ability to pay of the SME, so that financial institutions could actually trust that SME and give them a loan and give them some financing. So the data points we're looking at are all sorts of alternative data points from, in addition to the traditional ones, from utility bill payments, digital transactions and payments across your supply chain, over-the-counter payments at a small retail shop using QR code and so on and so forth, or POS terminals, all sorts of transactional information that we can actually collect through digital tools and digital means, but also the fact that the SME, particularly the smallest ones, might have taken one of our online financial and digital literacy education modules, for instance, as well, which is a stepping stone. Of course, you need to understand how to use financing effectively for your business. You need to understand how to use digital tools effectively for your business to be able to grow your business. So from that starting point, which is more education-based, to all the different alternative data points that could be collected, including if an SME, for instance, is using an app for stock and inventory management, you could also collect that information. Or if an SME in a climate vulnerable context has subscribed to an insurance to protect them against climate risks, for instance. That's also a very relevant information for a financial institution, right? And so how can we collect all of these different data points directly from trusted sources of that information and build them into a sort of a credential or a digital passport, if you would like, for an SME, for that SME to be able to display that to a financial institution who might then be able to actually make a credit decision on that basis and start providing financing to those SMEs. And so we are in the context or in the process right now of designing what that credential look like. It has to be trusted, as I mentioned. So we work with financial regulators in different countries and direct data sources and data providers to be able to collect that information in a trusted way. We are going to, at some point, use a blockchain-based platform to make sure that the data is there transparently, accessible, visible, owned by the SME, and displayable by the SME on request and on demand. And we want it to be universal because we would like that to also support not just domestic financing, but also cross-border trade financing, for instance, for export SMEs. And so the concept has already been designed in its initial draft. It has been tested in Ghana, in the Philippines. There's already been a first financial transaction made in real time, in real life on that basis, on the basis of the credentials. And we are currently starting to engage different stakeholders in Cambodia and Indonesia to be able to actually test the concept. And of course, that means collecting data points, having a digital record that's owned by the SME, that the SME can display. That means using AI-based algorithms for credit decisioning processes on the basis of that data to unlock financing. And hopefully we can be back at the Singapore FinTech Festival to share a few lessons and learnings from these first experiments. Thank you.
Right, great. Yeah, I think we covered quite a lot more ground than I expected to in this couple of questions. So I'm going to condense it a little. I think one of the common themes I think I'm hearing is that, there's this need to make sure that the underlying data that you guys are working with is transparent and trusted even, in the first place. But otherwise, even if you employ all these kind of new fancier platforms or technologies, you're just dealing with the same old kind of jumbled ESG or sustainability related data. So, and I'm also hearing, the use of blockchain being quite a key, being one of the key technologies that's being employed. So I understand that OLEA is, enabled by blockchain, and I'm not sure how much of that is also being used for the UNDP's development of the UTCs. But yeah, to what extent can blockchain or existing technologies maybe help to make all this sustainability related data more transparent and accurate? And if that's enough, or we kind of need to employ other sorts of new technologies in the future?
Maybe I'll start with our sort of use case right now, right? The way that we currently deploy blockchain is on one dimension, which is providing transparency to the ultimate capital market investors to check. So we provide the transparency to let them know what exactly are they buying. Yeah. So there is one single. Obviously, these infrastructure that we build, can be easily used to do tokenization, meaning I broaden the liquidity base to support trade, right? And also then work upstream. When I said work upstream, is actually collecting data about the sort of E, about the S, scoring of the suppliers, so that you encourage your funder to give a differentiated pricing to corporates that provide positive impact on sustainability. And this is a journey we embark, and that's the end goal that we are aiming. I can't say that because I have the first one to go. OLEA is very green, right? We pretty much have less than 12 months of actually live history. So we do have the benefit of a lot of the backend from our investors to have a lot of the infrastructure ready, but it's a long journey. But I think to go back to your point about this is, I think, as I always try to say that is, blockchain is just one box, right? There's a whole lot of other boxes you need to take. I think one thing that I hate to jump, but then I really need to, it's actually is quite to the core of what I actually always believe, is that the market need to have standards that people can refer to. Standard, for example, a disclosure standard. A lot of the greenwashing today, you say, oh yes, a lot of scandal, but some of it is a genuine mistake. What I meant is that because you don't actually have a standard of disclosure, then you leave the door really wide for people to interpret. then it's actually very hard to then to say that, okay, you're greenwashing or not. I think this is exactly what the regulators is actually very crucial in this aspect. So I just kind of like, I really want to say that it's a combination of the market participant, is a combination of the government and the regulator, and a combination of what technology can do. And this is actually the fundamental core belief that I have, rather than just taking one aspect of it and say that, okay, this is a silver bullet. I tend not to agree that there is one silver bullet in this complex problem we are facing.
And I think, standards-wise, I'm sure the regulators are working very hard on that, from what I'm hearing. So,
absolutely, and the transparency is a quite important part. And what we are also seeing in the tech world, that there is a shift how tech was being adopted. If you take 20, 30 years back, the different financial institutions or any institutions will call a software development provider and say, can you build, these are my specs, can you build these things to me? And everybody has their own specs and those systems are running for them. But that has gone to a sea change now. People are trying to adopt what's the best practice. What are the market standard features, functions, requirements what are the regulatory norms which can be adopted from a technology point of view? And that's where the software productization is started. And now it has gone to a leverage that now institutions can adopt those technology platforms which has inbuilt data points, inbuilt processes, inbuilt regulatory reports. Because if tomorrow a regulator comes and say, can you give me this report? Then I will take 3 months to build this report and come back today. By push of a button, they can get it in real time. We are seeing also some of the scenarios when regulators are going into their data center rooms and saying, I will draw the reports directly from the system. So the tech is certainly enabling the transparency, how the financial system used to operate. It has matured a lot. It is further maturing with the advent of the technologies such as blockchains, AI, and big data. AI and big data is making churning all the data quite easier, because then you can use higher machine power to consolidate all the data and provide the actionable insights from there. And blockchain is creating more transparency, as same data what an investor will see, what a fund manager will see, or what a regulator will see is the same. There's a very interesting initiative going on currently in Thailand when they are putting all the government bonds on blockchain. So now the tech systems have to connect to subscribe to a bond coming from a blockchain platform and done by and run by the regulator. So it is creating a huge level of transparency in how the financial ecosystem and the transparency used to work.
right. And IS, do you have anything to add? I'm sure you're also working on the universal trusted credentials, right? And if you wanted to expand on that as well.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Just a couple of things to react to what my fellow panelists have been saying. Obviously, I'm talking about technology, but standards are extremely important. They are the foundation of everything. That becomes the point of reference for measuring how sustainable you are or you aren't. And that opens the door to greenwashing and a lot of misinterpretation. So standards are extremely critical. Now, in regards to UTC, and I'll come back to standards in a second, it's not currently run on a blockchain platform. We have a technology partner, Singapore-based, which is called Proxtera, which is actually providing the backend technology for those credentials. We are asking ourselves the question as to whether we should transition that in the long run over a blockchain platform to considering some issues around transparency, trust, but also data portability, easy accessibility, easy exposure and display of a particular SME credential, and so on and so forth. So there's many areas where blockchain could actually support. So we are looking at potentially shifting that towards a blockchain platform, but that's not the case yet, just to clarify. And we're also connected to another project called Greenprint that you must know, which is incubated within MAS, and which will be providing the sustainability and ESG data in an automated way for SMEs, so that the UTC, as we are designing it right now, will not just comprise financial and operational performance data points, but there will be ESG data points as well that will be sourced from Greenprint in that particular case, to build a full profile of the SME. And of course, when we say that now, that takes us back to the standard conversation. ESG data points for SMEs to have is fantastic, but do they even mean something? And of course, they have to be meaning something against relevant standards. And it just so happens that UNDP is also running the Sustainable Finance Working Group of the G20, which is very much concerned with the sustainability reporting of SMEs, and which is currently in the process of designing standards. And it's an international standard setting body called the ISSB, which is mandated to design ESG standards that will be applicable at the SME level. We are very much engaged with that effort on the regulatory side and standardization side to make sure that at some point, what we are doing from the bottom up using UTC and automated ESG reporting is connected to what's happening in the international processes from a top-down perspective in terms of designing standards, and that at some point we actually meet so that standards support the tech and tech can actually support the operationalization of the standards. So this is extremely important. I've been talking a lot about tech, but obviously we need those standards and those taxonomies without which tech becomes almost irrelevant in a sense. So that needs to connect at some point. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ayaz. Yeah, I like that point about for the data to mean something. I mean, you kind of need common standards for like this consensus that, you know, there's progress being made and how you track that. And I think that's also a good segue into, yeah, there's this question I had in terms of, because we're dealing with tech, right, and it tends to be quite, I mean, if there's too much regulation, then perhaps it's not able to take off at scale. But then if there's no regulation, like we were talking about in standards, then even if we come up with, even if we can draw this big data out, we aren't able to, I think, properly make sense of it and make sure that it has integrity. So, you know, when should, you know, regulators kind of play a more active and intervening role, and when should they kind of step back a little? Like, where is the, from your perspectives, I guess, being in a space that straddles the need for both? Yeah. What's your take?
For me, personally speaking, regulators are like guardians. When kids are growing, they need to take care of it, but they're a teenager, they need to back off a bit, and when they are mature, they need to sit back and enjoy. So that's the kind of a role, and especially in the sustainable finance world, what we are seeing, that MiFID II has come, which has put its norm. Initially, there were a lot of regulations coming in, a lot of guidelines coming in, oversight coming, but slowly when the markets are maturing and the environment is maturing, then they have taken a more of an oversight role. On and off, the intervention is needed because we don't want to get into 2018 scenario, 2008 scenario when the financial crisis all hit us, and then the whole financial landscape changed. So certainly then there's a balanced oversight is required, which will enable proper scale and functioning of the financial ecosystem, and especially on the ESG topic, while it is still maturing, there might be little more active involvement required, but at certain point of time, it will become a BAU as a part of our day-to-day life. So that's the balance which we see how regulators have been doing, and it is also very close to how we have seen the financial inclusion coming in many of the markets where regulators were really encouraging the banks, go and open an account, get everybody in the banking system. Help them open the accounts, do the digitalization. But now we have seen it had raised to a scale when regulators are taking a bit of a step back and doing more oversight. So that's the kind of a balance which is required, which, you know, again, a guardianship is there.
And what about you, Amelia? Do you have?
I absolutely agree. It's a little bit of double-edged swords, right? On one hand, I think, so because of my background, I experience types of regulator across the world are very different. I experienced someone who's like a really sort of stronghold policeman, always try to catch you for whatever mistakes you made, right? There are some regulators that have that approach. Whereas I actually also came across with some regulators is more like, lack of a better word, it's more like partnership is both like overseeing and also encouraging development. So we are talking about very, very different attitude or approach across the world. I definitely, as I can say, I
What's your preferred
do
way?
think that. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it's hard, right? If you kind of say you only oversee and provide guidance, what if somebody breaches it? There has to have consequence. The question is the bar of the consequence. We need to set it right, which is an art. I hate to say that because when you set it's an art, meaning you have no answer to it. But it is really. So I truly believe regulators and the government has a very strong role to play in pushing the sustainability agenda. I can fairly fair to say that I don't think anyone has the right sort of approach yet. In the global forum, you can see that we talk about standard. We talk about actually not only the standard, is then if you want to oversee or provide oversight, the extent of the oversight you have on the different players, because I do actually come across that there's some oversight is different across different participants in the same space. So then you create a uneven level playing field. Then you create an arbitrage in the market that I actually think is also unhealthy. Other than the standard is also the approach to oversight. And then I actually think that, lack of the better word, punishment is not punishment. I think the consequence of the breaches also need to be carefully thought through. Otherwise, like we just said, right? If you punish it too early, then actually you stop people from trying. So that also need to actually carefully manage in what I see is not a mature area right now in the market.
Right.
There's a very interesting, saying goes around in our sales life and sales circles. The worst time to call a prospect from a bank is when anybody can guess it. When regulators are around doing the audits, never call a bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are never in a good mood.
Exactly.
That's true. Thanks for that. I'm just conscious of time, and I just want to alert the audience that I just kind of have like one or two more questions. So I'll soon be opening the floor up to questions. So do take your time to come up with a question as succinct as possible, yeah, and I also wanted to I think there's a lot of anxiety over like tech and automation as well, replacing, humans, and I think I just wanted your takes as well. How much can all this tech and automation actually replace human oversight and checks to verify, I guess, ESG credentials, right? We're talking about this digital ESG credentials for businesses, for small businesses, and I guess for, across the supply chain as well. So I think Amelia already mentioned, right? It's beyond just sort of the environmental data, which I think is increasingly accessible, in terms of carbon emissions, and it's also very easily quantifiable. But when it comes to things like human rights and social and governance issues, I think it can be quite hard to come up with a set of qualitative or quantitative metrics. So yeah, I was trying to, maybe what's your take on how much like tech and automation that I guess you're trying to do, right, can replace human oversight?
I think it's never going to be completely erasing the human oversight, but it's actually a large part of it can, I would say over 90% sometimes, actually you can actually improve the automation, and then you have the one last sort of like human oversight. But I think you touch upon two topics, right? And I do think that particularly in terms of using tech and automations, you can actually measure quite a lot of the social impact, right? I can tell you one of the examples that I've seen in the market. which we are closely discussing with them, is they actually allow the factory employee actually to have a mobile app. So the randomly set up survey is that how whether like your working hours, so you actually measure the social impact of it. Are they torturing the employee? Do they have child labor? And it's actually very well designed. The whole process is very automatic. Is that from mobile app to connect to an AI machine to generate a preliminary report, then some investigator will actually go on site. So you always have a combination of technology, automations with a bit of a human oversight so that you make sure that what you collect does not have the bias based on a certain sort of unforeseeable sort of random factors that could happen during that period of time. So I think it's a combination.
IS, do you have anything to add? Because, you know, this ESG credentials that I guess you guys are trialing and trying to create is, I guess, an attempt to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, on your question about sort of automation of verification, this is already happening in so many different ways, right? We see financial regulators using RegTech and SupTech to be able to actually supervise and oversee financial transactions. We see governments using AI to be able to identify and predict tax evasion. There's many different ways in which technology is already being used to some extent to automate oversight and supervision of different things. And in the ESG space, it wouldn't be any different. We already have so many different ways, particularly on the E side, on the climate and environmental side, we have so many technologies available today that help us collect different types of data points and reference points to be able to assess the actual environmental impact of businesses and investments and so on and so forth, provided we have the right standards, again, to measure that against. But that's already happening in many ways. And of course, we are seeing a combination of human and technology-based oversight and supervision practices unfolding. This is still needed at this point in time. It's important to have it. But I think there's a lot of different ways in which it's been done. And maybe one quick point about the previous question about about regulating things. I think there's many questions we need to ask ourselves. It's important in the financial space. I see a lot of co-creation and partnership between regulators and financial institutions, and that's extremely helpful, not to impact innovation negatively, but also to exercise some sort of oversight. But we are now faced with a range of new questions with the development of artificial intelligence and other technologies. We see AI engines creating text, creating images, creating drawings, paintings, music, creating culture in a sense. At some point, and I know we're getting a bit out of the application of AI in the financial space and sustainability space, but that raises a lot of new issues and new questions about do we need to regulate that? To what extent do we want to regulate it? And then how does it apply to the financial sector and the sustainability sector? And what space do we give to that expression? And so there's a lot of new questions that I think the industry and the sector is also grappling with as we walk the walk. And it's going to be really interesting to see the different responses. Thanks.
Thanks, Ayaz. Yeah, and with that, I want to open the floor up to questions. So, okay. I know we have some people joining us online as well, so we'll watch out for questions there.
Thank you for a great panel. It's really interesting. To the last point in the application of AI, I want to ask about that and the extent to which it might be dangerous actually to use AI, for example, to screen for greenwashing among ESG disclosures when we know that a lot of the ESG data is not reliable, to your earlier point. So yeah, I guess the question is, to what extent can we use AI to screen for greenwashing in sustainability disclosures?
I don't have the sort of market sort of statistic, but my personal experience in one or two cases that we try to use AI to do that, my sort of experience is that at the moment, it will give you patterns that you still need to actually go in to investigate. It is still not yet you use it as a decision-making tools in terms of the ESG, particularly at this. Although a lot of the startup and technology, they do actually say that, okay, I have automatic scoring system using AI, but you still kind of like, you're not, to me, it's just that you are using a very small part of the AI, like, which is actually really just the calculation part you automate, right? To truly use the predictive sort of ability of the AI, you do need to actually have very, I would say, structured data. But structured data, to begin with, has lots of elements. At least two critical is standard and sources of your data, which source is credible, which is not, which is currently the market is actually lacking. That's why at the moment, I would say my experience is that it's very, very useful to spot pattern, but you cannot replace a human to make a decision on that at this point, from my experience.
Anyone else wanted to add?
Yeah, I would totally concur. I think it's a field where you can actually have some big brush assessment and identify patterns and trends. There's no application that I am aware of at the moment that actually would provide a very accurate assessment of greenwashing, for instance, using AI. It's a field that's being developed at the moment. It's still being researched a lot. There's a lot of experiments. So I wouldn't say that at this point, we would be confident and comfortable using AI in a general way for detailed assessments of greenwashing, but that will help you identify, as Amelia was saying, specific patterns and trends for further investigation and further due diligence in a sense. So it's a supporting tool at this point in time rather than really a decision-making tool in a sense.
And also, and as any technology is a double-edged sword, we can use this for the benefit of everybody, or we can use it for doing things like greenwashing. So technology gives us an element. It's up to us how do we really apply it.
Right. All right. I think we have time for. Well, actually, we're almost out of time. But 1 to 2 more questions if they're short. Okay, the gentleman over here.
Yep. Hi, I'm Ian, and I'm from Greenweb. We're a Singapore climate tech that does digital decarbonization. So today we talked a lot about the applications of technology, very interesting, very promising applications. But I was just wondering from a private sector perspective, as well as a regulation perspective, whether we have actually considered the carbon footprint of technology itself, right, of the digital world. Are we adding to the problem when we're trying to solve another problem? In other words, what's the net advantage or the net cost? Because at Greenweb, we talk to regulators, we talk to private entities as well, and we find that this conversation is lacking, right? When we talk about the transition from, say, retail banking to iBanking, right? Lots of banks tell you that they're cutting carbon emissions physically, but they don't measure how much carbon emission there is from massive and sometimes unnecessary online transactions, right? And so I was just wondering for the panel, all three, whether you could basically share your insights on this matter. Thank you.
So maybe I'll take this question to start with. What we are seeing that if you take any individual companies, is a tech company or the banks, everybody has their own emission and green objectives. Let's say for Avloq, we have a net zero aim by 2030. And similarly, other fintech companies and institutions, each of them have their own goals. And if collectively we meet these goals, then we can control the extra load which will get into the environment in terms of distillation. If we all do our individual parts as a company, as an individual, that will end of day result into a net zero objective, which all of us we have.
I actually just want to say the question is very good questions. I think our experience is there are increasing chat about it, but it's not enough focus on it, right? The simple thing we keep on talking blockchain is we all know, right? If you go into, if you go to the processing center, actually mainly the market is using coal to produce electricity, then you actually completely defeat the purpose. The good thing is, a few years ago, nobody talked about it. At the moment, starting to talk about it, but I don't think it's at a serious level or even at a level that people know how to do it, right? So other than appreciating the questions, I don't necessarily have any answer.
I guess, like, what is the UNDP's view on this?
There's different aspects to the question, right? It's a very important one because overall, I mean, and there's multiple estimates being floated around. The impact of technology in general in terms of our global GHG emissions ranges from 2 to 5, 6%, in some cases 7% of total CO2 emissions in a sense. And so obviously technology has a carbon footprint that needs to be taken into account. A number of organizations that I know of are actually accounting for that in their net zero transition plans, and they will need to account for all sorts of factors, including the use of technology as part of that. And of course, tech companies even more so, I would say. Now, in terms of our projects and the projects, for instance, when I was telling you that we design financial instruments on a blockchain type of platform for mobilizing private capital for the conservation and the financing of the restoration of natural ecosystems, we do take into account in the overall operations environmental cost, if you would like. We do take into account the impact of technology, but our projects are also very much way beyond just an environmental focus. Even when we work on the environmental natural ecosystem conservation efforts, which has a very strong environmental focus, there's a lot of other aspects of sustainable development that come into consideration: social impact, economic impact, and so on and so forth. And so we need to take into account the broader outcomes. And within those outcomes, of course, when we look at the environmental outcome, we take into account the carbon footprint of the technologies being used as well. And this is starting to be considered by more and more organizations as they design their net zero transition plans.
Right. Yeah, I think that was a great question. And yeah, I think increasingly as well, like for data centers in the region, I think people are concerned about the kind of working environments in these data centers as well. So I guess bringing in, it's not just, it's like, are you kind of working against what you say your technology or solution or platform is actually purporting to work for, you know, with things, with the underlying technologies, and yeah, it's a really good, it's a good consideration that I think more businesses need to be more transparent about. Yeah, any final questions from our audience online? Were there any questions? Okay. Last call? Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for those questions. I think just as a final closing question for our panelists, this is quite a big question, but I'm hoping that we can keep it to just 1 minute each, given the time constraints. Yeah, what is one key change that the global financial system needs so that sustainable outcomes, you know, sustainable being not just the environment, but of course, as we have talked about, social and governance issues as well, right? Become the norm and not just the niche part of finance? And how can technology help to drive that? Who wants to take a stab at it first?
I can start if you want.
Okay.
I'll try. So listen, there are many things to be said. I'll try to stick to just one idea, which is really around making businesses more sustainable and reducing greenwashing. I think we really need a major shift in the market to bring in regulation standards and practices to place the sustainable development goals, and particularly climate action, at the heart of operations of markets and economies. And so for me, it's way beyond the ESG discussions that we are having. We really need to look at the sustainable development goals more holistically and require, I would say, a clear transition plan, a clear sustainable development goal transition plan from each institution, that is part of the international financial architecture, And that's where technology can actually play a key role in then measuring progress against those SDG transition plans, in making sure that the data that's reported back and information that's reported back on progress is accurate, analyze trends, analyze patterns, be able to verify that. And in many ways, in those transition plans, I think institutions that are part of the financial architecture should also engage their beneficiaries and their constituencies on their sustainability preferences. Individual investors should have a word and a say on their sustainability preferences. So there's another aspect here in the retail space where technology can actually also play a key role in engaging all the people around the world on their sustainability awareness and preferences, so that organizations and institutions can actually also reflect that in their own decisions. I would say engaging individual end users and investors and consumers on sustainability preferences, and also being able to actually accurately drive and measure and monitor progress against sustainable development goals, transition plans. That would be sort of my wish on my wish list.
I'll add to it. I think I definitely agree that there's an urgency to set around what our goal is on each of the SDGs, right? At the moment, I think there's a lot of arguments in terms of, say, for example, carbon emissions. There's a lot of argument in terms of which country, how much we should measure, but at least fundamental level is what are we trying to measure, at least need to align. Then every country, without the argument of whether X country need to meet this standard, Y country need to meet standard, or you want to make sure that everybody going to a level playing field, I think this is a little bit too much. It's one thing is at least you tell us what it is. Because I believe human beings have a tendency to do good things if they know what is the good things they need to do. At the moment, it's just lack of that.
I think that's a very important point, and what Ayaz mentioned and Amelia mentioned about if human knows how to make the right decision, they will be encouraged to make the right decision. If you translate that into the investment world, what Ayaz also mentioned, one of the key disruption we wish we could happen, if you, as you would know, in financial system, most of the instrument data comes from providers as MSCI, or it is Bloomberg or Refinitiv. If each of these financial instrument data providers can start classifying the instrument on their green matrix and say, okay, you're going to invest in X and XYZ bond, this is a green matrix for these bonds, then each individual would have that real-time data before making the decision on the investment, and that can drive a sea change into the human behavior and how those companies raising the funds will try to behave into the market, and adaptation could have a major impact into the us driving towards a greener world.
Great, thanks for all of that. I think, yeah, with that, we will conclude this panel discussion. And, I thank you so much for your time. And I think for the audience, don't feel free to rush off as well. We have some wine and cheese outside for you guys to network over. But yeah, I think some key points that, I definitely learned a lot from just this discussion. But I think the key points, I think that really stood out was, the need for all these tech is not so much in the tech itself to continue developing that, but having that developed in tandem with the right standards that's rightly calibrated for different sizes of companies, and also having, we don't really need newer technologies, but we need to match the existing ones that we have with the most appropriate applications, and to make that immediately accessible, I think, to different companies with different capabilities, and to different countries who have, well, I guess, varying standards in terms of the financial infrastructure. But yeah, thanks so much for your attention, and please join me in thanking our very wonderful panelists as well.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, sorry, we can't.
As will have your share of cheese and wine.
Yeah.
And when you're next Singapore, then we'll
I'll give
treat
you my
you.
share. Happily. Thanks a lot. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks, Iris.
Bye-bye.